Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to our webinar today, A Whole Farm Approach to System Change and Going Organic. My name's Colleen McCulloch. I'm from Soil Association Scotland, and we'll have a look at the aspects of organic conversion and kind of what that can look like in practice. So a quick kind of run through of what we're going to look at today. I'll do a quick bit on whole farm plans with the SAF deadline coming up in May. I thought it'd be quite good to remind ourselves what the requirements are for that, and if you're getting basic payments, and if you're already organic, then you'll be subject to the requirements around the whole farm plan audit. So we'll have a quick look at that, and then a look at the sort of conversion process of organic. What are the sort of opportunities at the moment for converting to organic in Scotland, particularly, and the sort of process and the support that can be available in terms of funding for that. And then we'll hear from Rachel Ives on her experience of converting to organic 5 years ago and kind of that system change and what that has looked like for her, what the process has been like. And we'll have a bit of a chat and get questions. We've got a couple of our certification team here as well for answering the sort of technical questions too. So we'll kind of stop for questions between each section, I think, as well, and then have a bit more discussion at the end. So that's kind of the plan. So I will just crack on. Thank you to everybody that filled in the pre-event questionnaire. It's always just useful to get a sense of what people are kind of wanting to get out of the webinars and events that we do, just to make sure we're sort of meeting what folk are looking for in terms of information. So some of the things that came through was sort of implementing organic principles. We'll have a quick look at that. The process of going organic, a kind of overview, understanding the whole farm requirements as well, because some of the audits that you have to do for whole farm plans, you tick the box automatically if you're organic. And I look at the funding options, so that was useful to get that just kind of sense of what people are looking for. So this webinar is part of a series that we've been running at Soil Association Scotland, part of a programme called Whole Farm Planning and Planning for Change, and that's been running for nearly 18 months, looking at sort of whole farm plans, what the requirements are, but using that as a starting point to think about if you've got this data that you're having to collect, you might as well be using it for management decisions, and how can you make the best of that data that you're gathering anyway, and how does that relate to sort of whole farm planning, holistic sort of systems, to make sure that you can be as sort of efficient, resilient, effective as you can, and using information and data to kind of give you that better picture. So this is part of that programme funded by the Scottish Government that's finishing soon. So we've done sort of lots of different topics, but all relating to whole farm planning and whole farm systems. So in terms of the sort of requirements for whole farm plans, these came into effect last May. So this is the second year, and it's a requirement for your basic payment if you're in receipt of basic payment. One aspect of it is the Scottish Government wants to get kind of baseline data over 5 different areas of how farms right across Scotland are doing, in terms of kind of soil health, carbon. We'll look at the areas in a wee second. So they've linked that to the basic payments to sort of incentivise everybody doing that very baseline level data collection. But then the other part of it is that they are keen for everybody to be using that data for planning and management decisions, to benefit farms and crops and sort of improve resilience, profitability, and those kind of things. So I'm sure everybody will be aware. I'll just kind of go through this quite quickly, that whole farm plans cover carbon, soil, biodiversity, animal health and welfare, and IPM, which is integrated pest management. And by sort of linking all of these together, or they do all link together, but being able to sort of quantify and baseline these different areas, it's hoped that it makes it a bit easier to see where things can interconnect or make efficiencies from one thing to another thing when you're linking them together a bit more. So the 5 areas, or the 5 audit areas, have different time scales. So 3 of them have to be done every 5 years, and the 2 on the right hand side are annual ones. Um, so soil analysis, carbon audits, habitat surveys, IPM plans, and animal health and welfare plans, which always trips me up a bit. And the kind of hope for kind of doing all these, measuring all these, and using that for management is to increase system health and reduce inputs and carbon footprints across farms. Um, so just we'll have a quick look through each one. And by 2028, farms will need to have done all of the plans that apply to them. So if you haven't got livestock, you don't need to obviously do the animal health and welfare plan. The same with if you're not growing crops or using chemicals. Um, and the 2 on the right that have the red ring around them, if you're organic already or about to sort of convert to organic, your livestock management plan and your crop management plan count towards these 2 annual ones, and so you automatically tick the box for those. And then the other ones, you have until well, for all of them, you have until 2028 to get them all started. And if you have a carbon audit or a soil analysis, for example, from 2024, that covers 5 years. So you'd already be covered for those as well for this year. So soil analysis, all fields across the whole farm have to be done by 2028. So depending on the size of your holding, it might be easier to do like 20% of your farm each year to get analysis done so that you spread the cost of that if you're having to send samples to the lab. And it applies just to region 1 land. So if your land is region 2, it's not essential. You don't need to do that for your basic payment, but they still encourage people to be monitoring the soil health. There's lots of stuff on our website, which we'll share in a follow-up email after the webinar today, resources on other ways to test your soil health beyond the sort of chemical lab test. And so this one is every 5 years, you have to have the whole farm kind of surveyed, but you can do it in chunks each year. Carbon audits is also every 5 years that has to be refreshed. There's lots of different platforms. We recently had a webinar on carbon audits and all the different platforms, and there's a couple of good free ones, including the Farm Carbon Toolkit, which we have a link on our webpage that you can do without having to pay a subscription or a advisor to do. And that can help sort of reduce costs from things and help you look at the detail of what you're doing. Habitat surveys, we also recently did a webinar on this as well. We've got a handy little video on the web page that we'll share in the follow-up with a demo of how to use the Farm Biodiversity Scotland app, which is a sort of quick and easy way to do your habitat map for your farm. But you can also use sort of paper and crayons or do it through the land parcel ID system on the Rural Payments website. So that's every 5 years. And then the annual ones, if you're organic, you'll have a crop management plan that's similar to the IPM plan. If you're in an assurance scheme, you might already be doing this through Red Tractor, for example. There's different websites there. We'll share these slides as well. Different sort of platforms that you can do it on, and they have a kind of form that you go through to think about the sort of planning of rotations, diversity of your crops, different methods of kind of weed control, and how different habitats on your farm could maybe support pest predators, for example, with the aim of reducing chemical inputs and improving biodiversity and crop diversity. And then animal health and welfare plan. If you're organic, you'll have this for your livestock management plan. with the sort of framing that if your animals are healthier, they're going to be more productive in terms of producing meat or milk. It reduces emissions, and your system is sort of more efficient if you're not using a lot of medicine, for example, and your animals are robust, and sort of tighter breeding and things. So we've got on our webpage again, we've got past webinars and resources on all of these individually. So these all sort of pull together to help set objectives or look at objectives and management decisions on a farm. So just kind of looking at like integrating trees, for example, could have an impact on improving animal health and welfare through shade and shelter, pest and disease management, if that's creating sort of habitats through hedges for pest predators, for example. It links to the habitats. It can link to water management by reducing flood risk, depending on where and how and what you plant. It can have an impact on soil health and then profitability and resilience as well. So all of these things are sort of interlinked, and the kind of baselining and monitoring of the audit areas can help kind of pull out some of these different objectives, which of course are different on every farm. So that's the end of that very sort of whistle stop run through of the whole farm plan bit. Are there any questions? I'm not able to see the chat, so Jane, if there's anything
There are
burning
no
questions, you can
questions.
maybe shoot them out.
Nothing yet.
Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the next bit. Looking at, we'll have a look at the sort of conversion process, opportunities at the moment in Scotland in terms of kind of support for organic, and what that can look like. And before I get into it, I'm going to hope that my video link is going to work. We've made a video with Rachel. Oh yeah, hopefully it's going to work. And this is the teaser trailer for the video, so I'm just going to share this. Let me know if you can't hear.
Went to an organic system because actually at the time there was some good funding from the Scottish Government, but also it would reduce our costs and our overheads being organic because you get the majority of what you need from inside the system. The animal health and welfare plan was also a really useful thing to do. It led me to spending an hour with the vet discussing all sorts of concerns that I did have. It was almost like a therapy session. We can make nature abundant again in the UK by supporting farmers who are farming with nature and in organic regenerative systems.
There we go. I'm always slightly relieved when it works. So yeah, we'll share the full little video that we did after the event with the follow-up stuff. But I thought it was just nice to pop that in. So in terms of sort of converting to organic or managing organically, at the moment and in the last year or so, there's sort of a lot of increasing support for organic in Scotland. The Scottish Government committed a few years ago to doubling the amount of organic land in Scotland by 2026, which they had put as a sort of official pledge. And I'm not sure if we're going to quite get there, but the amount of organic land in conversion has certainly more than doubled. And we had a organic gathering in November. Mary Goujon came and launched the Organic Action Plan, which we had been working with the Scottish Organic Stakeholders Group. So that's the first Organic Action Plan in the UK that's had funding associated with it. So there's, I didn't write down what the amount of money is that's attached to it over the next 3 years, but there's sort of a big chunk of money attached to help support raising public awareness of organic supply chains and infrastructure, training and research, public procurement, and growing the sector in the market, the organic market. And so it's great that there's some money actually finally being put to supporting the organic sector to grow in Scotland. And there's a few organisations, including us, SAOS and Scotland Food and Drink, which will be delivering on some of that work, and then pulling in different parts of the sector and producers to kind of help us deliver some of that. And there's a lot of sort of evidence from Europe that targeted organic action plans, which they use quite effectively in countries in Europe, are good at driving growth in production and consumption of organic food. So we're quite optimistic that this is a good time to be sort of coming into the sector, because there's some resource to kind of support more people than there has been in the past. So yeah, that sort of increase in organic land in Scotland, the amount of land in conversion has doubled since the last 2 or 3 years, but tripled from since 2018. More land in organic cereals and sort of consistent policy support, which is good to see. And I'll touch on the AICS funding bit later on. And there was a cap, there used to be a cap on how much land you could convert. So bigger farms couldn't always put all of their land into conversion. They've scrapped that now. So bigger farms can convert their whole farm. Demand for organic is also rising. This is from last year's organic market report. We have a new organic market report coming out, I think next week, or in the next couple of weeks. We will have a link to the launch of that in the follow-up email. But the sort of increase in sales of food and drink, of organic food and drink, is outstripping conventional in sort of value and units when they break it down in different ways. And in Scotland, the value of organic market has grown by 20% in the last 5 years. So there's definitely more appetite from consumers, and people are looking for organic produce to buy. And then this is the organic market report that I mentioned. We've got a new one coming out. So we produce this every year to have a look at sort of breaking down sales of organic in the UK. This year in 2026 will be the first year that we have data to do a Scotland specific organic market report, which I think a lot of the data used to just not be collected and it wasn't available. So we've been sort of pushing for that for quite a few years to get Scotland specific data. So we finally now have, and that'll be launched in the next week or two to give a clearer picture on what bits of the sector are growing, where there's opportunities for more growth, what the gaps are, what consumers are wanting to buy. So what is organic and what does it deliver? I think probably most people will be kind of familiar with this, but the organic label is quite important from a consumer point of view. When people are surveyed who are buying organic food, the organic symbol is quite an important thing, because then you know that it has been inspected to a standard, it's a legally binding standard, it's internationally recognised, the standards are sort of consistent across countries, and there's the consumer confidence coming from that. And then it's also, from the production side, it's a whole system approach, and it sort of also is sort of certified right across the supply chain, all the processing from one end right to the other. So that gives confidence, and it's based on the principles of ecology, health, fairness, and care. And I would get quite a lot of questions about regenerative and organic, and organic farming is regenerative farming, but it also avoids artificial inputs like glyphosate, for example. It's avoiding pesticides, boosts nature more. The animal welfare standards, I think, don't really come into regenerative, or they're not sort of, you could miss that bit out if you wanted to. The standards that cover the whole supply chain that I mentioned, and fewer additives and preservatives. So there's a few, it's sort of regenerative and a lot of extra things. So for sort of questions that come up around sort of regenerative and organic, there's a lot of really, really great regenerative farmers and food being produced. But because it's not sort of inspected or certified or have standards attached, then it's a lot easier to sort of greenwash or pick bits of it that work for you, but not have the whole system approach. So this is just another graphic that kind of highlights that um, the regenerative bit on the left has a lot of good aspects, but it doesn't have things like animal welfare standards or exclusion of GMOs, for example, rules around antibiotics and how you use that, and rules around the amount of regenerative ingredients. For example, if you've got something like bread or a regenerative cake or breakfast cereal, it could contain other stuff. So this is just quite a nice graphic that it gives a sort of useful comparison. And a quick look at the systems. If I press the button enough times for it to get all the bits without going to the next slide. In arable and horticulture, as sort of across different systems, organic systems are based around diversity and building resilience through diversity and rotating crops and sort of regeneration of the soil. So there's lots of overlap with regen through that bit, but sort of using legumes, clovers, cover crops, and adding fertility through things like digestate and manure and through good rotations that have diversity, not just in the sort of kinds of crops, but in the varieties and the kind of rooting depth and all that sort of thing. And also in the timings. And that then sort of ties in like the IPM, the integrated pest management, reducing pest and disease risk, and kind of being proactive about keeping on top of weeds is always a sort of aspect of organic arable. And then sort of using that rotation to kind of build fertility and use it and have that sort of circular system. And it can reduce cash flow because if you're not spending a lot of money on inputs. And it can, with the livestock one that we'll look at in a second, it's sort of fitting your setup and your system to your farm situation. So depending on what your soil is, what your sort of where you are in the country, what the markets are, what's available to you, and kind of how your system can work. It can be sort of quite flexible and adaptive to kind of fit your farm rather than trying to make your farm fit a system. And then bear with me while I just click lots of times. And organic systems in livestock, again, sort of increasing diversity in pasture, based around it's sort of pasture based and clover based swards, diverse swards, herbal lays, kind of linking all of these things in, and quite often looking at native species and sort of slower growing species that can finish off grass, because then you're not bringing in input and resource into the system. Organic systems are more often free range as well. It kind of fits the sort of native species side of it as well, making it forage based. And then quite often with the sort of more native species, that has implications for having kind of lower need for antibiotics and anthelmintics if they are suited to the ground and the system that you have on your farm, and the sort of circle there linking your system to your farm capabilities, kind of fitting what you've got with the farm that you have and the land that you have, and then understanding the needs of your market, which we'll touch on again in a little bit, but kind of what is the market for the product that you want to produce, the meat or the wool or things, kind of understanding that market as well when you're designing your system. So in terms of kind of regulations, what do they cover? as I sort of mentioned before, it goes right through the whole supply chain from production, um, processing, distribution, and selling at the other end, as well as the sort of packaging and labeling side of it. So there are sort of standards that fit every stage of these. So if you're a producer and a processor, for example, you'd be sort of inspected on all stages of that. So if you're someone who's sort of thinking about organic conversion, um, and not quite sure where to start, have a look at the standards and kind of get familiar with what they look like, what changes might need to then happen in your system compared to what it is just now. You might be sort of quite close to being organic already in terms of your approach, but sort of thinking about how you manage fertility or your breed of livestock, for example, um, what the conversion period is going to look like. Does your livestock breeding need to change? Does your kind of grass sward need to change or things like that? Doing a bit of sort of planning in advance and then looking at the markets and supply chain for what you're planning to produce. If it's direct sales, then that's quite different to if you're selling into like a multiple retailer supply chain, for example. So kind of having a think about that. Where is your produce going to go? And then learning from others and building your network is quite an important bit as well. We've got a lot of sort of resources on our website and a technical team that are very helpful if you need to pick up the phone. But then there's lots of organisations in Scotland and across the UK that do a lot of kind of knowledge exchange and monitor farms, farm walks, farmer cluster networks that are really useful to kind of engage with, to hear from other people that are doing the same thing at the same time or a bit ahead of you that you can learn from. So in terms of funding for organic in Scotland, the window for the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme has just opened this week and is open for funding applications till the end of July. If you're putting in an application that also has other AICS options in it, like hedge planting, for example, your application needs to be in by the 20th of June. So just to be aware of that. But the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme is where you would apply to for funding for organic conversion and organic maintenance. So the conversion bit is a higher payment rate in the first couple of years to sort of help with extra costs associated with kind of changing your system. And the maintenance then keeps that going for 3 years at a slightly reduced rate. So this can help with like certification fees, for example, or just costs of changing infrastructure and changing a system. So a quick look at the payment rates. These are on our website. Jane, if you are able to put in the chat a link to the web page that has this information, we'll share it in the follow-up email as well. But the payments are on a per hectare basis. So like £280 for arable, 140 for improved grassland, much less for unimproved and rough grazing, and then a bit more for fruit and veg, because that's sort of more intense on a smaller scale. And then the maintenance rates are the reduced rates for the years 3 to 5. So how to apply through AICS. I'll go through the sort of AICS bit and the Soil Association certification application process kind of at the same time, because if you're sort of applying for conversion at the moment and applying for AICS funding, they kind of happen in parallel, or they can happen in parallel. So if you were starting doing it now, it'd be good to kind of do both together, with the first step of having a chat with our certification team. And they are super helpful at kind of knowing where to start with everything. But you'd need a BRN number for your business if you haven't got that already. And then there is the website where you do your AICS application. And as part of that, you need an organic viability proposal. So I'll look at that separately in a moment. And the certification team can help sort of think about what needs to go into that. So you need that signed off by a certification body like Soil Association or SOPA, is the other big one in Scotland, and they can help you sort of know what to put into that and sign it off, and then you put that in as part of your AICS application. And then once that's approved, you can start your conversion. And again, there's more detail of this information on our website, which we'll share the link for. So kind of the Soil Association side of it, first thing is get in touch with the certification team, and chat about kind of the standards, the grant payment opportunities, the kind of process, what you what your system is like just now, what you're planning to work towards, what you want that to look like, and have a chat, and then they can help sort of know what to put into the organic viability proposal, which we'll look at next, and do the AICS, start the AICS bit, and then for the Soil Association side, submit your application, chat to a cert officer, and then you get a visit from us, um, further down the process. So the organic viability proposal is a document, that kind of looks at your crop rotations, for example, the type of land, what you're going to plan for your first lot of crop rotations, during your conversion process. And then there's sort of tabs for livestock, and sort of all the other parts. So I think it asks, Tom and Anya can maybe chip in if there's questions about this afterwards, about sort of things that are in this organic viability proposal, but it kind of lays out, um, what is your system going to look like, and what is your next sort of 3 years going to look like in terms of rotations and livestock. What's your livestock numbers going to be like, for example, and your animal health and welfare plan or livestock management plan. You would be starting to think about that at the same time. And then once you've sort of done that bit and got your AICS funding, then you complete your conversion, and or to complete your conversion, sort of 2 years of that conversion period where you are farming organically and not using the inputs, and that sort of lets the land then not have chemicals in the soil, for example, anymore, and transition. And then after the 2 years, you'll be certified organic, and then have annual inspections and keep in touch with the certification team, when you need support, and they're super friendly and helpful. And in terms of sort of practicalities of inspections, you have an annual inspection, but we also have bolt-ons for other schemes like Pasture for Life, for example, Red Tractor, to avoid the sort of duplication of all the paperwork. We can do several of those together. So it means record keeping is really important to keep on top of that. And there's lots of information and sort of technical guides and how-to guides and things on our website, and we're here to help. So in terms of resources, we'll put this link in the chat and or the follow-up email. But yeah, we have lots of resources on the website, but a super friendly, helpful team as well that can answer questions over the phone or by email and things as well. So lots of stuff about the sort of certification process, but just like the standards, business support. Once you're sort of farming organically, all the sort of technical info and guides and things are really helpful. So we'll share some of that in the follow-up. So that's a sort of very quick, felt run through of stuff. So I'll take any questions if there are any, and I can stop sharing if I find the right button and see the chat and people. Thanks, Jane, for putting all the links into the chat. And I see one person is typing something. Tom, I'm going to pick on you since I can see your thing on the screen there. Is there any bits that that I missed out, or that would be useful to sort of add any more information on at this stage?
Not from my perspective, Colleen. No, I think you've given a really good overview. But from a certification perspective, you know, where the system is relatively simple, then that obviously sort of lessens the amount of you know, information that needs to be compiled. So yeah, I appreciate everyone might have different farms, different enterprises. So it's best to start, I find, from where the farm's at, and then see the plans, and then sort of pick up on any certification issues. So if anyone's got any, you know, specific queries relating to their scenario, and me or Anya from the team would be happy to.
And I see a couple in the chat, but I'll jump in before that and just ask for, in terms of sort of time scale of doing an application from when somebody sort of picks up the phone and has that first chat to then starting their conversion period. Is it really variable, or sort of what's the kind of ballpark time scale of how long that might take? It's maybe different for different systems.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, a key pinch point, sort of date, sort of trigger date, if you like, would be the date that we receive an application form. You know, actually receive a completed form by email. That's the earliest date that you can start conversion. So conversions can begin from that very day, or a date in the future if you choose. Forgive me, I'm not an expert on the AIC scheme and all those requirements as well. So however that interacts, whatever the requirements of that scheme are, and how organic conversion will interplay in that, just bear in mind, you know, get the application in sooner for the future rather than later, because it's more tricky to sort of backdate. In fact, we can't really backdate certificates. So, but in terms of your question, I suppose one of the main allowances needed for timing might be the availability of one of our inspectors, depending on where they are and what else they've got booked. However, that date of inspection doesn't impact your conversion start date from when your license will run. We have a system where we can have flexibility with inspection dates, so that helps us and helps our farming licensees as well. Yeah, but you know, if you have particular deadlines, I'd say do let us know about them. We can sort of push the pedal down a bit, you know, in individual cases if there's a need for a particular rush. But a ballpark from date of application to issuing complete license, I'd probably say 8 to 12 weeks, something like that.
Okay, that's quicker than I thought. Thanks, Tom.
Good.
There's a question that I'm not sure of the answer for, but I can find out. Can the payment rate for managing unimproved grass under AICs be additional to the payment for species-rich grassland? I am not sure if it can, but I can go away and check. We're keeping a note of the questions, so I can follow that up and stick the answer in the follow-up email. I think would be easiest, because I'm not sure about like AICs double funding bits, but I will check that one. And then there's a question around so processing is always a sort of big topic of discussion in Scotland around meat abattoirs and butchers. How much demand is there for an organic butchery in Scotland to support small organic producers? I would say there's a lot of folk asking about that, and it depends where you are in the country. There's, in terms of butchery, there's one in Dingwall that I know is sort of very well used, and then a couple of smaller ones in sort of borders area, but in between, on the small scale, there is a dearth, I think, of butchers and abattoirs, as well as the sort of pinch point, depending where you are in the country. So yes, I would say quite good demand. I think if there are butchers, if there was a butcher advertising that they could do organic butchery, I don't think he would be struggling for customers. I think folk are looking for that in most areas of Scotland. What are the main challenges that people experience in converting or being an organic livestock farm? I don't know if Anya or Tom want to answer that. From my sort of point of view from the chats that I have, um, it sort of depends what breed, if you're changing breed, or changing your system, or sort of changing your grazing system is something that sometimes comes up. Getting organic straw and hay in the winter is maybe another recurring theme. But yeah, I don't know if Anya or Tom want to come in on that at all.
Yeah, I can. I think kind of similar to what Tom was saying earlier, it kind of depends on your system and how complicated or how not complicated it is to start with. But feed can sometimes be hard to source organically, and also, like you were saying as well, finding organic abattoirs or butchers can also be quite challenging depending on where you are in the country. But yeah, again, I think it just depends on kind of how much you've got going on in your system, how simple or how complex it is. It's kind of case by case. I would say feed is probably one that I come across the most.
Yeah, and another thing to be aware of with livestock is that any supplementary minerals, including boluses, do need to be something that's approved for organic use. They don't necessarily need to be certified as products, but we do need to check the ingredients. The mineral forms are listed in the organic standards, so that's something to be aware of. And yeah, I'd say routes to market, it's often disappointing when animals are born on an organic farm and raised and finished, and then they can't have that status at the end because there's no availability of a certified butcher or abattoir. Just to mention, we can potentially cover the use of an uncertified abattoir and or butcher under an on-farm processing license extension. There is an additional cost for to be paid to us to cover the inspection time for that, and there's a sort of agreement and various records that will need to be kept to verify the organic integrity of those animals as they move through. But there's potential there, so do get in touch with us if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, and from a sort of charity side point of view, that's something that we are kind of working with other stakeholders quite a lot on, is the sort of abattoir and butcher provision, and getting better coverage across Scotland, because it's just so tricky for sort of all abattoirs and butchers. It's a really tricky time at the moment, but we're sort of lobbying a lot for that. And through the Organic Action Plan, there's sort of work planned to kind of help develop the supply chain and the processing side of it, and see where we can, join the dots or find support for those bits of the sector. And there is a new abattoir coordinator person with Quality Meat Scotland. She's based in Quality Meat Scotland, to try and help smaller scale people access abattoirs sort of collectively, so that if you've only got a few beasts, if you can sort of have a lorry full all going together to get slaughtered together as organic, and it's sort of trying to coordinate that piece. And then we're also working with SOS and others. There's a sort of pilot project in Orkney on a tiny trailer abattoir being developed, which is quite cool and could be a good model to sort of roll out in different areas that don't have close organic abattoirs or small scale availability. So we're kind of working on that. Conscious of time, we will thank you for answering those questions. And any more that people think of, just pop them in the chat, and we'll hand over now to Rachel to chat about her farm and what she's been doing and her experience of going from sort of quite intensive to now organic livestock system, pasture-based livestock system. So I will hand over to you. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Colleen. I'll just get my screen shared.
That's good, we can see that.
Is that all good? Great.
Perfect.
So I'll just, and you can hear me as well. Okay, good. So back in 2020, I took our family farm on. It is I'm the third generation. We have quite a small farm, and it was previously let out. Half of the farm was let out to our neighbours who farmed it intensively, and the other half of our farm was planted in native Scottish woodland about 30 years ago by my parents. That was planted in Scottish woodland because it was sort of rough grazing and the fences had become quite dilapidated, and it didn't really make any sense to put new fences in because of the cost. It made sense to get a grant from the Scottish government to put it in native Scottish woodland. So that was sort of the layout of our farm. We are in a very nice spot overlooking the River Tay. We're also part of our farm is part of a triple SI, an SPA and an SAC, which are all words to do with, you know, protection for geological formations and for birds and things like that. So in the intensive arable system, there was a lot of ploughing. This is a picture of kind of what it looked like, what one of our fields looked like in 2017. With the increase of sort of more severe weather patterns, the things were becoming wetter, muddier. We've also got a private water supply, which started to, when we ran water in the house and things, that does the whole farm, and it comes off the field. The catchment actually comes off the field, and that supplies all the houses. And when you ran the tap, it started to go brown. And we were looking at ways of what we could do to sort of mitigate that. And additionally, we knew that there had been a big decrease in farmland birds and insects and species, and we also wanted to make a habitat for all these different animals. Another thing that we sort of encountered with the system, we were finding a lot of plastics around. In the picture on the left there, that's my daughter picking up plastic after that they'd used in the growing of vegetables, even just things being blown over onto our land from feeding pheasants, people walking their dogs, you know, tennis balls and stuff like that. And we're always picking up these things from the fields. This is a picture of one of the shelter belts that was sort of planted about 70 years ago. And you can see that decrease in soil depth, which is about 7 inches. And on the right there is a picture of the sort of soil. We do have a heavy clay land, but that's very much kludgy and in big lumps, where it should have been sort of a smoother kind of tilth. And this is what our sort of, it looked like when you ran a bath at the worst stage. So we knew we had to change, you know, and what was it that we were going to do? And we had all these overlying thoughts and ideas about what can we also do that's positive and beneficial for the environment and reduce our impact whilst making a positive impact for the birds and the wildlife, given the area that we were in. So this is on the right hand side, you see that's us digging up our water supply and putting new pipes in, but we didn't want to go back to the same situation we had before. You can see here these are sort of wading birds. So the lapwing is down 55%, and this was back in 2023. The curlew, which we do get in this area, was down 61%. And, you know, all the farmland birds, oystercatcher, redshag, they were sort of going down. So we decided that we would go organic. We put in a funding for the application. We were quite fortunate because that arable area was classified as arable. So we got the higher payment, which did cover a lot of our sowing costs for sowing this herbal ley. And it also went towards covering quite a lot of the fencing costs as well, because we had to put in a significant amount of fencing. We went for we looked at various different combinations of a herbal ley. and the species, and we specifically went for herbal ley because of all the benefits that they have to offer. It has sort of deep rooting plants that hold the soil together, which is what we needed for our water supply in order to stop all that soil coming down and being washed in. It also has all these nitrogen fixing legumes, so we haven't had to fertilize yet, our soil samples show, and this is about 6 years down the line, so we've not had to fertilize. With the different sort of species, you also get like different grasses that come out earlier on in the year, and then other grasses come out later in the year, so it actually extends your grazing period, so you can have animals on that ground for longer. Some of the species, like the chicory, are an anthelmintic, which means it's a natural wormer, so you don't have to worm your livestock so often. We actually do fecal egg samples regularly in order to ensure that instead of blanket worming, we do fecal egg samples, so that if we don't just worm because we think they might have worms, we worm based on evidence of fecal egg samples, but typically they're very low, and sometimes we don't have any worms, especially with the ewes. The other sort of benefits of the herbal ley are just the massive amount of insects that you provide habitat for in summer, and it's lovely to go out into the field and you just see the whole thing buzzing. So that's why we went for herbal ley, and various different people offer it. We got Hurl seeds because we thought that had the right mix for our land and was quite good value at the time. And you can just see how many insects and butterflies and things that it supports. So we also, in our conversion to organic, we also had to like put in a lot of fencing. Although there had been fencing there previously, it was dilapidated and it wasn't usable. So our organic conversion payment did help go towards a large amount of the fencing costs. We did a lot ourselves as well, where we could, but mainly we had a fencer doing it. But on the right hand side, you can see that's a strainer post that we made in-house. So we cut the steel, we welded it together, and that's quite a decent steel strainer. We tried different forms, different sort of strainers. We actually even cut down some oaks from our woods to use as strainers. Unfortunately, they haven't lasted, so we're going to have to replace them soon. But the steel strainers did really well and haven't shifted, and they were concreted in. This is my dad, who is about nearly 80, doing a bit of welding to put our gates up. So we did a lot of work ourselves as well to basically get the project off the ground. And if you have practical skills, then that's quite handy. In the other thing we did was we established our own sort of brand of sheep, products as well from our sheep. So we need, since we're a bit smaller, only having sort of 765 acres of sort of grazing land, we needed to have that sort of niche products that provides you with a better income, because it wasn't going to be a numbers game with us where we could have lots of sheep. It was like we would have a lesser amount of sheep, but we would also provide a product that would provide added value. So we have a flock of merino sheep, and we make products out of their wool. So we very much sort of with the organic mindset on, we have a sort of strict breeding program. We breed of healthy animals that have good feet and can thrive in our environment, which is key to our system, because then you're not always having problems and having to bring sheep in and giving them treatments, because you're breeding from the really healthy ones that tend not to have issues. And we found that our breeding strategy over the years has really reduce the amount of times that we actually have to intervene. We have an outdoor lambing system. The kids help with pet lambs and things like that. And that's quite low input, low maintenance. So that works well for us. We have, over the years, we needed help. I needed help. So we took on our first collie dog about 3 years ago and watched a few videos. Luckily, she was hardwired, so she had that in her, and we trained her up, and now she's a great working dog. So we're very much a dog and stick enterprise. That's it. You just go out with the dog. We don't have a quad. We've got a forklift to put bales out, but we don't have a lot of machinery and equipment that's costly. And I've got a pickup, so that's what we operate with. Over the years, we have applied for, we've had the organic funding, which was really beneficial to get our project and our whole farm off the ground. But we also were lucky enough to get funding from the Nature Restoration Fund. And that paid to fence off our woodland area. And we've introduced an organic herd of Dexter cattle, which are quite light-footed. So they do well in the woods, they don't make a big mess, and they can actually thrive off the vegetation that's there. We feed haylage out to them over winter, and in summer they just, they're happy, they can live off the grass and they eat the trees, but they also get a great amount of shelter. And we're finding with the weather that's sort of changing, and we've had a period of 41 days of rain, that the cattle in the woods have done really well in that shelter, because they can get that cover, they're not being rained on or blowed at all the time by the wind. So they seem really happy in there. And as part of the nature restoration funding as well, we put in a shelter belt, which you can see to the left of that picture. That's between our farm and the neighbouring farm. So we've got shelter from the east, which is very important for livestock. This is in our sort of ex-arable area. Also, we've got several hedgerows. So this was planted last year or the year before. So over the years, we were excited about that growing. So the animals can get more shelter in that area. It's also great for our rotational grazing system, having all the fields divided up so that animals aren't on a patch, on one big field for the entire time. They're in a smaller big field. And that's quite important with herbal lay, because the other fields will get the opportunity to rest. So a resting period for us is really important. And that provides that sort of system. That's it. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
Thanks, Rachel. Can you hear me okay? I think my headphones ran out of battery while you were talking there. So are you able to hear me okay without the headphones?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for taking us through that. It kind of it's interesting to see how it's all sort of evolved and how all the bits kind of support each other, in terms of the sort of hedges and then helping the rotation. And I think moving the animals around then will help with like pest and disease management, especially the sort of soil-borne things and worms and stuff. Kind of moving them around means that they're not they're sort of got clean grazing quite often. And when Jane and I came to visit you when we were making our wee video that we'll share with people next week, it was very clear that there was quite a stark difference in terms of kind of habitat on your farm, but also just sort of biodiversity, the insects and the birds and hares and stuff that we saw were very clearly abundant on your patch, and then sort of right next door there was not very much going on at all. So it's just sort of interesting and quite illustrative to see that difference, between sort of you and your neighbours in terms of how you manage the soil and things. One question that's come in the chat is, what was the impact on your net profit over those few years?
So prior to us sort of taking on the farm, our turnover was a lot less because it was just let out. So we've got a much bigger turnover. But we're still at the stage where we still invest a lot of money back into the farm, because we're just always trying to do our next sort of enterprise or build. So obviously it's increased a lot, but we do still we're always working on our next project as well at the same time.
Thanks. I wonder if there's not many questions, we can finish a bit early. And a couple of people saying very inspiring and looks really good to see what you've done there. I wonder if Tom or Anya have any other sort of comments or things to kind of highlight from your experience, or things that you've done, or questions for you, or things that are you know, in terms of your sort of net profit and how that changes over time as you sort of convert and transition and stuff. So I'll let either of you come in if you've got anything that you want to add.
I've nothing to add so much in terms of profit. I've only been working with soil just over a year, so I'm still getting to know our licensees and getting feedback on that kind of thing. But I suppose the hope is that over time you're using less medicines and less inputs. So that should hopefully help save money. But in terms of profit and stuff, I wouldn't have much to comment, and I've nothing else to really add either at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, some financial information going into detail about the sort of bottom line. There is, it's the Organic Farm Management Handbook, I think published by the Organic Research Centre. Yeah, that's that one, isn't it? I can't remember when the last one is. They tend to update them, if not every year, every few years. So that's useful. You know, full breakdowns of sort of estimate costings for various enterprises. Yeah, you're going to say.
I think there's a new version due out in 2026, actually, of the Farm Management Handbook. I'll have a look. We've got a link. I'll try and put it in the follow-up email, a link to the sort of previous one. So that webpage might have a update on when the next one's coming out, but I think there might be a refreshed one coming out soon. And I know they've been doing a lot of work around the sort of financial side of, you know, kind of case studies and things as well of what that can look like in practice when your cost of inputs reduces, and then, you know, where's your money going instead, or what's your profit coming from instead. So yeah, we'll share that. So yeah, hopefully that was really helpful for people.
I can just briefly mention something as well. Just say that our certification fees are a bit lower for the first 2 years to reflect that you're in conversion. Obviously, yeah, not getting that organic premium price that we hope is there when you're fully organic. The crops you can harvest in the second year of conversion, and to have in conversion status of any crops. Sometimes that gets a bit of a, you know, sort of 50% of the organic premium there for some of those crops. And with livestock, you've got the option to be converting your livestock during those first 2-year conversion period as well, so that you may have some stores or finished stock have been born during that period and can be fully organic as soon as your land becomes organic. So, but yeah, just please reach out to the CERT team in our contact form or email if you'd like, have any questions or would like to find out more.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, when we do the follow-up email, we'll put the contact details for the certification team in that email for folk to get in touch, and you can look on the website as well. One more question was to Rachel: how much support did you get and guidance when you were applying, and for things like record keeping and stuff? How did you find that?
Well, I was lucky enough to have other farmers in the area that had already done the organic conversion, and they were kind enough to spend some time with me, just going through everything and giving me that sort of reassurance that it can be done, and it's it can absolutely be done. It's not, you know, you're taking a leap, but it can be done. And my certification officer, when I came out, because we didn't initially start off with livestock, because we hadn't sort of bought it yet, so we had to let the grazing. He came in and he said, look, just when you get your livestock, just keep a track of everything. Just, you know, keep a diary and just make sure you write everything down. And that's really important for your organic certification. You just need to you have like a record, and they will be able to guide you, but just try and keep a track of everything and write that information down so it's available.
Very good advice. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully that's been quite useful. And before we kind of wrap up, we have a quick feedback survey just to kind of gauge how our events go and to help us plan for future events, and for kind of reporting back, seeing what topics are useful for people and stuff. So Jane, if you are able to pop the link for that feedback survey into the chat, if people are able to do that just now before we wrap up, or at least start it before we wrap up, it's a lot easier than trying to get people to do it with the follow-up email in a few days, because I know I am very much not good at doing surveys and feedback forms and stuff after the fact. So if people could click on that link and at least start it just now, that'd be very appreciated. And it helps us with sort of always try and tailor events to kind of what people are asking for in terms of topic and information and stuff. One more thing to flag in terms of support is we also have an organic producer board in Scotland that has 8 licensees, farmers and crofters, and actually Rachel is one, for sort of advice, questions and things around the sort of supply chain and organic sector as well, or things if you want us to be sort of representing your interests as organic producers, you can get in touch either through me and Jane, or there's a bit on our website in the farmer section for the contact details for the Organic Producer Board, and they work sort of quite a lot across sort of different stakeholders and just representing the organic sector at like Scottish Government level and in the media and things like that. So if there's things that you think we as Soil Association should be doing on your behalf as organic producers, get in touch and let us know, because there's a lot of stuff that we do or try and do around sort of policy advocacy and influencing and kind of working with stakeholders across the organic and wider farming sectors, to try and sort of support the organic sector. So do get in touch if that feels useful as well. And if there isn't any more questions at this stage, I will thank all of our speakers and our certification team for coming along and chatting today. Hopefully it's been useful for folk, and if you think of other questions afterwards, just pop us an email, and we'll send the recording and follow-up links and stuff either by the end of this week or on Monday next week. So thank you very much.